Hey guys, I'm Dwayne Estes, the Executive Director of the Southeastern Grasslands Initiative. You know, all too often we think about grasslands as being the great prairies of the Midwest, the oak savannas of Illinois, the longleaf pine savannas of Florida. What we often fail to realize is that Appalachia is just as much a grassland region as any of those. Now, that slope in the back is an artificial grassland. We would call that an anthropogenic grassland, meaning that, you know, it was all forest historically before it was cleared sometime in probably the early 19th century by white settlers in this region to make farms. And of course today it's some great grazing land. It's covered over with orchard grass and fescue and many other types of European grasses. But here in the foreground behind me, one of the things that you can see is that there are these meadows associated with the creek. Whereas a lot of Appalachia was indeed forested, we believe that these meadows along many of the bottomlands of some of the stream valleys here in Southern Appalachia may have actually been open for a long period of time. What kept these valleys open? Well, they're too well watered to have carried fire, so fire does not make sense in this ecosystem or in this landscape. There's a chance that, you know, bison and elk could have played a role here, but some believe that bison were not present in this region prior to the year 1500. So if you cannot invoke fire, and grazers and browsers may not be significant enough to have created landscapes like this, what can? Well, there's a really awesome force in nature, and it's actually a small mammal with two big front teeth, and you got it, it's called a beaver. And the beaver has been in North America for millions of years. In fact, before we have the modern beaver that we have today, we had the giant beaver. And so what I'm standing in is a beaver meadow that, and the beavers have done an awesome job of sort of constructing this ecosystem. That's why we call them ecosystem engineers. So let's take a look at their work and what has followed in the wake of sort of an accident, if you will. So right behind me, you'll see a cluster of sticks and brush, and we're at what was once an old beaver dam. And this dam actually broke as a result of a couple of 2 days of heavy rainfall. And everything upstream of the dam on the other side of the creek, you can see there's some sycamore trees along the bank, which is typical for this region. But all of that was inundated with a few feet of water, you know, probably anywhere from about 1 to 3 feet. So it was actually a small impoundment behind this beaver dam. And so the way the beavers get this material to build this dam and their lodge, which was out there in the open water, is, you know, they harvest, they graze. So basically they would go into these surrounding areas, like back in here, and they chop down the alders with their teeth, and not only can they take down some things a few inches in diameter, but they can absolutely take down trees a couple feet in diameter. So things like oak trees and maples, and they tend to probably go for the softer hardwoods, but they absolutely are fair game to the beaver. And so as they fell those, then those are gradually pulled into place, especially the smaller limbs, and they use that to create this debris dam, which of course we know is a beaver dam. Now, that process of creating the beaver dam raises the water level, and it raises it too high to support the trees behind it. So it's very common. I don't see it here because this beaver dam has probably been in place for quite a while, but in many areas where beavers have come back to the landscape and build their dams, the flooding that happens behind the dam is just too much for the trees, and so they can't tolerate that level of inundation, and then those trees will die, and eventually they'll topple, or the beaver will chew them and they'll fall. And you can see it begins to create this open space, probably from what once would have been a forested landscape. Now what happens then as the beaver graze from place to place, and they chew down alder thickets and other kinds of riparian shrubs, well, that creates an opening that is basically a beaver meadow. And in this case, it's colonized by sedges. This is called Carex trichocarpa. In Tennessee, that's actually a rare species in some other southern states. But from Virginia north, it's pretty common. And in that, while it may look like a fairly uniform stand of this particular sedge, if you were to go into that, not only is it absolutely amazing in the summer and fall, but there's a lot of diversity in that sedge meadow. You can find a lot of species that need open sunlight conditions. Things like ironweeds and joe pye weed and asters and all kinds of stuff. There's Virginia mountain mint in there, for example. So the plants that need that habitat, they cannot thrive on the forested slope. So in many ways then, the beaver have artificially, or not artificially, they're part of nature. They created that meadow that many plant species are adapted to. Now, as the beaver move on, right, they exhaust the shrubs in there that they use for their dams, and ideally they would build a whole series of these dams and flood entire valleys. The density of dams can be quite great in some places like eastern Canada, where you could have, a dozen or more beaver dams in 1 mile of river. So imagine then if it's the year 1600 and beavers were here prior to the arrival of white people, the Native Americans. The Catawba tribe is in this region. Imagine then how much the beavers could have maintained this open valley. So by the time the first white settlers got to the area and started giving names to landmarks, like the name of John's Mountain over here, or the name of this creek, or the name of another creek in the nearby region, they oftentimes would give names that mean something. So for example, just down the way, they called it Meadow Creek. And the reason probably is that when they got there, there was already an open meadow. Now, we as ecologists oftentimes struggle to explain how that meadow got there, or how a given type of grassland got there in the well-watered and plenty of rainfall that we have here in eastern United States. But if we stop and consider that beavers were a part of this landscape for a very long time, then it makes sense that beavers are what could have and probably did maintain these grasslands. Now, there's two last components to this. One is that in addition to beaver, you can imagine that these would have opened up some tremendous grazing opportunities. So the bison that came here in, say, about 1500 would have been able to live in small herds up and down these valleys, relying on the forage that was produced as a result of the beaver activity. Elk would have come down out of the hills and also could be found here in these places. But all that was about to change by the late 1700s, certainly by the time of the American Revolution for this region. Beavers were already becoming quite rare, and buffalo and elk were nearly gone from overhunting. And so the fur trade coupled with overhunting rapidly eliminated those. So that really by the time this valley was settled in about the 1740s, 1750s, and thereafter, it was a changed landscape. Bison were gone, elk were diminishing and quickly being eliminated. Red wolves were nearly gone, probably, certainly by the early 19th century, and beavers were largely gone. So then, if you wanted to keep these open, man had to do it. And because that's a lot of manpower that it takes to do that, then many of these valley bottoms grew up. And so they later became forested. But the things that tell us that these valleys were open is all this abundance of plant life out here that still needs open sunshine. And we call these conservative heliophytes, sun lovers. And so if I were to walk through this meadow, everything from the type of sedges that grow here to the monkey flower that grows here, the marsh marigolds that grow in here, so many of the types of asters and goldenrods, like I said, they have to grow in this open condition. And they cannot grow on those forested slopes. Even the shrubs here tell that open land story. If you were to look over across that creek, most of what you see in that zone are hawthorns. In fact, there are 5 species of hawthorn. Those are tremendously important for nesting birds because their branches grow so intertwined that small birds can easily build nests and stay protected in those, the canopies of hawthorns. But hawthorns, once they grow in a forest, they quickly are shaded over and they just can't grow. They're absolutely just having a tremendous time over there. So we have this great mosaic, open water wetlands, beautiful meadows behind us. We've got thickets of hawthorns and American plum. And then these give way into a variety of upland forests on either side. So while these are wetlands, yes, they are also types of wet grassland communities. And importantly, they're exceptionally rare now in eastern North America. And I think that's really the highlight of why these federally protected wetlands here at the farm at Sinking Creek are so vitally important. And our work here is to understand what's in these wetlands, what is their history, what's their connection to the broader landscape. And we're sort of playing the role of forensic ecologists to see what's out here and bring that story to life, which is really important. Well, I'm glad you guys could be out here with me. I know that I sure am enjoying my time. Y'all stay safe, and we'll be talking to you soon. Thank you.